It was a rainy Monday morning. The sky was gray and the streets were wet. People rushed in and out of the big city courthouse, holding umbrellas and cups of hot coffee. Inside the building, it was warm and full of voices, footsteps, and the sound of papers being shuffled. Leah sat quietly on a wooden bench near the courtroom entrance. She wore a plain black dress, simple shoes, and held a small handbag on her lap. Her hair was tied back neatly. She looked calm, almost invisible to others. No one noticed her. No one asked who she was. But Leah was not just sitting there for no reason. She had a purpose. Moments later, a tall man walked in, wearing a dark blue suit and shiny black shoes. His name was Richard Keller. He was a powerful businessman, rich, proud, and used to getting whatever he wanted. He walked like he owned the place, his head high, his phone in one hand, and a fancy watch on the other. He was followed by his assistant, a young man in a gray suit, carrying papers and a laptop. Keller looked around, and then his eyes landed on Leah. He stopped walking. He raised an eyebrow, turned slightly to his assistant, and said in a low voice, "What's she doing here? Is this the cleaning shift?" The assistant chuckled nervously. "Maybe, sir." Keller laughed loudly. "These people always think they belong in places like this. She's probably lost." Leah heard every word, but she didn't move. She didn't say anything. She just looked down at her bag and waited. Keller kept walking, still smirking. He didn't even look at her again. To him, she was just another black woman sitting in the wrong place, just someone to laugh at. A few people nearby had also noticed her. The receptionist, a couple of lawyers passing by, and a security guard. They all glanced at her, then looked away. No one smiled. No. One greeted her, but Leah didn't care. She had been in situations like this before. She had learned how to stay silent. She had learned how to listen. She had learned how to let people show their true colors before she showed them hers. Across the room, two young law interns stood near a coffee machine. "Hey, look at that woman sitting near the courtroom," one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied. "She doesn't look like a lawyer. Maybe she's here for someone else's case. Or maybe she's just trying to get warm." They both laughed softly and took sips from their cups. 10 minutes passed. Leah remained seated, still and calm. She looked at the big clock on the wall. Almost 9:30 a.m. The courtroom would open soon. From her bag, she pulled out a small notebook and a pen. She flipped it open, read a few notes, then closed it again. Everything was ready. She didn't need anything else. Across the hall, Keller was joking with another lawyer. "I bet this case will take 5 minutes," he said. "These judges are all the same, lazy and slow." His friend laughed. "Well, this one is new, just got appointed, no experience." Keller grinned. "Even better. Let's get this over with. I have a golf meeting at 2. Then Keller looked over at Leah one more time. "She's still sitting there?" he said, sounding annoyed now. His friend shrugged. "Yeah, strange." Keller rolled his eyes. "Maybe I should give her $1, buy herself a lunch." His group laughed again. Still, Leah didn't react. She wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. She was patient. She had heard worse before. Leah's phone buzzed once. She looked at the screen. "Ready when you are," she typed. "Back. Almost time." Then she stood up slowly, fixed her dress, and walked toward the courtroom doors. Keller noticed her again. "Where is she going now?" he asked his assistant. "Maybe she got lost," the assistant replied. Keller watched as Leah walked past. Them, quiet, proud, not even looking their way. He shook his head. "These people have no shame." Suddenly, a security guard opened the courtroom door. "The court will begin in 5 minutes. All parties, please get ready," he announced. Keller gave his tie one last check in his phone camera, then entered the courtroom with his lawyer. Leah stood by the side door, waiting. Another woman dressed in a gray blazer walked over to her. "Ma'am, everything is ready," she whispered. Leah nodded. The woman smiled and said, "They have no idea, do they?" Leah gave a soft smile and said, "No, but they will." Inside the courtroom, people sat down. The room was large and quiet now, with dark wooden walls and a strong scent of leather chairs and paper. The flags stood tall behind the judge's bench. Everyone was waiting. Keller sat in his seat, relaxed, legs crossed. His lawyer placed a thick folder in front of him. "Don't worry," the lawyer whispered. "This judge is new. Easy win." Keller smirked. "I know. Let's make it. Fast." Then the clerk stood up and said in a loud voice, "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Leah Monroe presiding." Silence. Keller didn't stand at first. He looked confused. Then the side door opened, and Leah walked in wearing a black judge's robe, head held high. Keller's eyes widened. His mouth dropped slightly. His hands froze. Everyone stared. Leah walked slowly to the bench, stood behind the tall wooden desk, and looked over the room. Calm, powerful, in control. She took her seat. She picked up the small wooden gavel and said clearly, "Good morning. Please be seated." Her voice echoed across the room. No one said a word. Keller looked pale now. His lawyer leaned in and whispered, That's her?" Leah looked directly at Keller. He looked away. She didn't smile. She didn't speak, to him yet. But her eyes said it all. "You laughed at me. Now, watch me." The courtroom was still quiet. No one moved. Everyone was staring at Judge Leah Monroe, the same woman they had ignored just minutes ago. She sat tall behind the bench, her black robe smooth and neat. Her hands rested calmly in front of her. Her face showed no anger, no pride, just strength. Across the room, Richard Keller couldn't stop staring. His mouth was dry. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered, "This has to be some kind of mistake." But it wasn't. Judge Leah opened her case file and began reading like this was just another day in her life. Because it was. While the courtroom settled, Leah's mind went back to a memory, a moment that had never left her. She was 17, sitting under a flickering streetlight outside a small apartment. Her books were spread across her lap. The sounds of the city echoed around her. Cars, dogs barking, people shouting. Inside the apartment, her mother was sick. Her little brother was crying, but Leah kept studying. She had a dream. She wanted to become a lawyer. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but for people who never got a chance, people like her. Back in the courtroom, Leah flipped a page. Keller was still watching her, but now with worry in his eyes. He remembered what he had said earlier, all the jokes, the mocking. He didn't know she was the judge, but why had she stayed silent? Why didn't she tell him? Because Leah had learned something powerful. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. She didn't need to speak to be strong. Another flashback came. Leah, in her early 20s, walking into a top law school for the first time. She wore secondhand clothes and carried books that smelled of old paper. The hallways were bright and cold. Everyone looked different from her, richer, louder, more confident. One professor looked her up and down and said, "Are you sure you're in the right building?" Leah nodded softly and kept walking. She didn't answer. She didn't argue. She let her grades speak for her, and they did. She became one of the top students in her class. Back in the courtroom, Leah looked up at Keller. He looked away quickly, her gaze was calm, but it cut deep. She had faced bigger men than him. She had been laughed at before. But now, she was the one making the decisions. From the corner, a young court reporter watched her and whispered to a friend, "She's amazing." "So calm," the friend replied. "I thought she was a witness or something. I didn't expect this." "Exactly," the first one said. "She didn't need to say a word. And now she owns the room." Keller finally stood up. He tried to fix his voice and said loudly, "Your Honor, I wasn't aware you were assigned to this case." Leah looked at him, expressionless. "I was," she said. "And now we begin." Keller sat down again, nervous. The energy in the room had shifted. Now everyone was quiet. Everyone was watching, but not her. They were watching him, and they were thinking, did he really mock her outside? Is this the same woman? Yes, it was, and she hadn't changed a bit. But now the world saw her differently. Another memory flashed in Leah's mind. She was 26. She had just finished her first big trial as a lawyer. She had won the case for a woman who was being evicted unfairly. The woman cried and said, "You don't talk much, but you fight like a lion." Leah had smiled and replied, "I've had to." Back in the courtroom, she spoke clearly, though, "Court will now hear opening statements." Her voice was steady, strong, no anger, no emotion. Keller's lawyer stood and started talking, but his words were rushed. He kept glancing at Leah. She sat still, taking notes. Not once did she mention what Keller had said about her earlier. Not once did she call him out. She didn't need revenge. She had dignity. Keller fidgeted in his seat. He remembered how she had just sat quietly on the bench earlier, how he had laughed at her. Now, he wished he could go back and undo those words. But it was too late. The silence she gave him earlier was now louder than anything he'd ever heard. As the lawyer continued speaking, Leah glanced at the people sitting in the courtroom. Young, interns, old attorneys, reporters, and a few strangers. She knew many of them had judged her by her skin, her clothes, her silence. But she had learned this truth long ago. The world may not respect you until it has no choice. The opening arguments ended. Leah took a short break and stepped into her chambers. The courtroom was full now. Reporters sat quietly in the back, typing notes. Lawyers whispered to each other. The air felt thick, like something big was about to happen. Judge Leah Monroe stepped back to her seat. Everyone stood as she entered. She nodded once, and they sat again. Her face was calm, her voice firm. "We will now begin the hearing of case number 1732, the State versus Richard Keller." At those words, Richard Keller swallowed hard. Just 2 hours ago, he was joking, laughing, full of confidence. Now he could feel sweat on his neck. The clerk read the case summary aloud. "Mr. Keller is charged with large-scale real estate fraud, falsifying documents, and illegally removing families from their homes." Gasps came from the audience. Leah didn't flinch. She had seen worse. She had judged worse. Keller's lawyer stood up quickly. "Your Honor, we believe these claims are exaggerated. My client is a respected businessman." Leah looked at him with calm eyes. "We will see," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried power. Keller sat quietly, trying to appear relaxed, but he couldn't stop his leg from shaking under the table. He kept glancing at Leah. The same woman he had mocked now held his future in her hands. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered, "She has something to prove. She'll be harsh." His lawyer shook his head. "No, she's professional. She won't let emotions lead her." But Keller wasn't sure. He had made this personal. She hadn't. That scared him even more. The prosecutor stood. She was a young woman with sharp eyes and thick folders in her arms. "Your Honor," she said, "we are ready to present our evidence. We have documents, witness statements, and video proof." Leah nodded. "You may begin." And just like that, the game changed. The prosecutor pulled out the first piece of evidence, a signed paper. "This is a fake contract," she said. "Mr. Keller's company used it to take land from elderly homeowners." Leah read it carefully. She asked, "Who signed this?" The prosecutor pointed. "Mr. Keller's assistant, under Keller's orders." Leah looked at Keller. He looked. Down at his hands, more documents followed. fake signatures, emails, phone call recordings. With each piece, Keller looked smaller in his chair. The man who once walked like a king now looked like a student who didn't study. Leah stayed silent. She only asked questions when needed. She let the truth do the talking. That was her way. Halfway through, the prosecutor called her first witness. It was an old woman named Mrs. Harris. She walked slowly, holding a cane. She looked at Leah, and her eyes softened. Leah smiled gently and said, "Take your time." Mrs. Harris sat and began her story. "They told me I had to leave my home. I lived there 42 years. My husband died in that house. I begged them to give me time, but they said I had already signed the papers. But I never did." She looked toward Keller. "He smiled when I cried," she said. "Like I was nothing." The courtroom was silent. Even the reporter in the back stopped typing. Leah took a breath and asked kindly, "Mrs. Harris, are you certain you never signed anything?" Mrs. Harris raised a trembling hand. "I never did, Your Honor. I don't even know how to read properly." Leah nodded. "Thank you. You may rest now." As Mrs. Harris was helped back to her seat, Leah's hands tightened slightly. She didn't show it. But inside, she was angry, not just for this woman, but for so many others who had been cheated in silence, just like she had been laughed at. Others had been broken in silence, too. Next, the defense lawyer stood up. He tried to twist the facts. He said things like, "These are misunderstandings. My client only followed business procedures. There is no solid proof Mr. Keller knew about the fraud." But Leah had heard these tricks before. She watched the lawyer closely, her face still calm. Then she asked a question that hit hard. "Is your client saying he had no control over his own company?" The lawyer froze. He trusted his team, Your Honor." Leah raised an eyebrow. "So he gave power to others to destroy lives and did nothing?" The lawyer tried to speak, but the damage was done. People in the room began to whisper. Even Keller looked shaken. Leah called for a short recess. As she stood to leave, Keller finally spoke. "Your Honor," he said, voice unsure, "I didn't know who you were earlier. I didn't mean—" She paused and turned to him. "I know exactly what you meant," she said. Then she walked out. No shouting, no anger, just truth. In her chambers, Leah sat for a moment thinking. She wasn't doing this to prove anything to Keller. She was doing it for Mrs. Harris. For every person who was told they didn't belong. For every young black girl sitting quietly in the back, dreaming of more. Back in the courtroom, people began to see something new. They didn't just see a judge, they saw power with grace. They saw a voice that didn't need to yell. They saw a woman who didn't fight back with anger, but with truth. And truth was stronger than anything Keller had ever owned. The courtroom doors opened again. Judge Leah Monroe stepped back in, graceful and composed. Everyone stood. "Please be seated," she said calmly, taking her place behind the bench. Richard Keller sat stiffly in his chair. His expensive suit now felt tight around his neck. His hands were cold, but his forehead was sweaty. The room didn't feel warm. He just felt exposed. He had thought this hearing would be a formality. He thought it would be quick. Now, he was losing control. Leah looked down at her notes. Her eyes moved from paper to paper. She wasn't rushing. She was steady, careful, and completely focused. She turned to the prosecutor. "You may call your next witness." The prosecutor stood. "We'd like to call Mr. Kevin Watts, former financial analyst for Keller Enterprises." A young man in a worn-out suit walked in. He looked nervous but determined. Keller's face dropped. Not him. Kevin took the witness stand and raised his right hand. He was sworn in, then sat down. "Mr. Watts," the prosecutor began, "how long did you work for Mr. Keller?" "Almost 4 years," Kevin replied, voice a little shaky. And what was your job? I checked financial reports, tracked spending, and flagged anything unusual. Did you find anything unusual? Kevin paused. He glanced at Keller. Then he said softly, Yes, many times. Keller leaned forward. He's lying, he hissed to his lawyer. Leah looked up slowly. Mr. Keller, she said firmly, you will not speak unless spoken to. Keller sat back. His lawyer pulled at his sleeve, trying to calm him, but the damage was done. All eyes were now on Kevin. The prosecutor handed Kevin a printed spreadsheet. Can you explain this page? Kevin nodded. These are the fake payments. Money moved to ghost companies that didn't really exist. It was meant to look like property expenses, but it was all fake. Who approved the transfers? Kevin didn't blink. Mr. Keller. The courtroom gasped again. Keller looked like he had been punched. His lips moved, but no words came out. Leah remained calm. She looked at the spreadsheet carefully. Mr. Watts, she said, did you ever report these activities? Yes, he said, but I was told to keep quiet, or I'd be fired. Who told you that? Kevin hesitated, then answered, Mr. Keller, twice. Now Keller stood up, furious. This is ridiculous. Leah didn't raise her voice. Mr. Keller, she said, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt of court. Sit down. The room was silent. Even Keller's lawyer was stunned. Keller sat back down, his face red, his fists clenched. His voice was gone now. His power was slipping through his hands. Kevin left the witness. Stand. The prosecutor thanked him and sat back down. Leah took a deep breath and looked around the room. I will take all evidence into consideration, she said. We will continue tomorrow with the closing statements. She stood. Court is adjourned. With one hit of the gavel, the room stood again. Leah walked out. Keller didn't move. He stared at the floor, eyes wide, face pale. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked like a man who saw the truth and knew he couldn't run from it. Outside the courtroom, people whispered. She destroyed him with just her presence. She never even got angry. She's the strongest person in the room. In her private chambers, Leah sat alone. She removed her robe and hung it carefully. She looked in the mirror, then out the window. She remembered every moment they tried to break her, every word, every insult. She remembered sitting on that bench this morning, quiet, judged, ignored, and now, that same bench had led her to the highest seat in the room. At that moment, her phone buzzed, a message from her brother. Saw the news. You're amazing. Mama would be proud. Leah smiled. She typed back, Thanks, but this isn't over yet, because tomorrow was the final day, the day she would give her judgment. The day Keller would finally hear her voice, the one he ignored. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Reporters gathered outside with cameras. Inside, the seats filled fast. Everyone knew today was the final day. The tension felt heavy, like a storm waiting to hit. Richard Keller walked in with a stiff jaw and tired eyes. His confident smile was gone. He didn't look like a powerful businessman anymore. He looked like a man hoping for mercy. Judge Leah Monroe entered quietly, as always. But this time, everyone stood not just because it was the law. They stood with respect. She nodded once. Please be seated. The room sat in silence. Leah looked calm, but her eyes were sharp. She flipped through her file one last time. Her fingers stopped on a page that held Keller's name, bold and dark. Her expression didn't change, but deep inside, her heart remembered the disrespect, the laughter, the mocking. But this moment wasn't about her pride. This moment was about justice. The defense lawyer stood first. He looked nervous, unsure of what to say. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client regrets any misunderstanding. He believes no harm was done on purpose. Leah looked straight at him. Is that your closing statement? The lawyer hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. She turned to the prosecutor. The young woman stood tall. Her voice was clear and passionate. We've shown proof. We've shown lies, theft, and pain. Mr. Keller destroyed lives for money, and he laughed while doing it. She paused. We are not just asking for punishment. We are asking for truth to win. The courtroom was still. Leah closed the file slowly. Then she spoke. Before I give my decision, she began, I want to remind this court of something. Her voice was calm, but powerful. There are people in this world who believe their money makes them untouchable. She looked straight at Keller. There are people who think they can laugh at others because they wear better suits or speak. Louder. She didn't blink. But justice doesn't care about suits. It doesn't care about color, gender, or silence. She paused. Justice listens to truth. Keller shifted in his seat. Leah continued. This court finds Mr. Richard Keller guilty of fraud, document falsification, and illegal evictions. Keller's eyes widened. His lawyer gasped. Leah's voice didn't shake. As punishment, Mr. Keller will pay heavy fines, return property to all victims, and serve 5 years in prison without parole. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Keller stood up suddenly. This is crazy. You're doing this because of what I said outside. That's why. This is personal. Leah stood, calm as ever. No, Mr. Keller, she said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You judged me based on how I looked. You laughed because I was silent. You assumed I had no power. She leaned forward, just slightly. But justice isn't loud. It's steady. And it always comes. Security walked over to Keller. He looked around, hoping someone would defend him. No one did. Even his own lawyer looked away. As he was led out in handcuffs, his face dropped. That was the moment he finally understood. He hadn't lost to her because she was powerful. He lost because he was wrong. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed to Leah. Judge Monroe, how does it feel? She paused, then said quietly, It's not about how I feel. It's about what's right. Then she walked away. No cameras. No interviews. She didn't need attention. She had spoken through justice. Back in her chambers, she sat by the window. The city buzzed outside. Cars, horns, sirens, same noise as always. But inside her, something had changed. Not because Keller was punished, but because people had seen what true power looked like, a quiet black woman, with a spine of steel and a heart full of truth. After the courtroom cleared and the cameras left, Judge Leah Monroe stayed behind in her chambers. She sat alone. No robe, no papers, no crowd. Just silence. She looked at a small photo frame on her desk. It was old, faded, but full of memory. In the photo, a little black girl stood in front of a broken house, wearing second-hand clothes and holding a small book in her hand. That little girl was Leah. She leaned back in her chair and slowly, her mind drifted to the past. She remembered a tiny kitchen with a leaking roof. She remembered her mother, working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. She remembered nights with no electricity, studying by candlelight. She remembered how kids at school laughed at her hand-me-down shoes, how teachers ignored her when she raised her hand. But most of all, she remembered one thing clearly. The first time she saw her mother cry. It was a cold evening. Leah was only 12. She walked into the living room and saw her mother sitting on the floor holding a letter. They were being evicted. Her mother had been tricked. A fake loan, high interest, hidden payments. They had 3 weeks to leave. Leah didn't understand all the words in the letter, but she understood the pain on her mother's face. That night, she made herself a promise. I will never let anyone do this to us again. She didn't know how, she just knew. One day, she would fight back, and she did. Every day after school, she studied harder than anyone. When other kids played, she read law books from the library. When people said, "You're too quiet to be a lawyer," she smiled and studied more. When they said, "No one like you becomes a judge," she didn't answer. She just kept going. She remembered getting into law school. No one believed she could afford it. She couldn't, but she worked nights, cleaned offices, sold old clothes, ate one meal a day, but she made it. Years later, when she finally wore the judge's robe for the first time, she didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply looked at the sky and whispered, "We made it, Mama." Now, back in her office, she touched the photo frame gently. She wasn't thinking about Keller. She wasn't thinking about the courtroom. She was thinking about that little girl, the one who was told she'd never matter, the one who was told she was just another black girl. That same girl now wore the robe of justice. A soft knock came at the door. It was her assistant. "Judge Monroe, there's someone here to see you." Leah raised an eyebrow. "Who?" The assistant hesitated. "It's Mrs. Harris, from the trial." Leah stood at once. "Send her in." Mrs. Harris walked in slowly, the same cane in her hand, but this time her eyes were brighter. She held a paper bag. "Your Honor," she said softly, I just wanted to say thank you." Leah smiled. "You didn't have to." Mrs. Harris opened the bag and pulled out a small pie. "It's apple. I baked it myself. I know it's not much." Leah took it with both hands, carefully. "It's everything," she said gently. Mrs. Harris nodded, tears in her eyes. Then she whispered, "You reminded me of someone. My daughter. She passed years ago. She always wanted to be a judge." Leah's throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered back. After Mrs. Harris left, Leah sat again. Not as a judge, not as someone powerful, just as a girl who kept a promise. It had only been a week since the Keller trial ended, but Judge Leah Monroe wasn't resting. She was back in her office early each morning, working through case files, listening to hearings, and writing decisions. Her face stayed calm, her tone was firm, her mind sharp as ever. But inside, she knew something was coming. A bigger storm. A new fight. That afternoon, her assistant walked in, holding a letter. "There's something strange," she said. "This came directly from the State Justice Department." Leah opened it carefully as her eyes moved across the page. Her face changed, just slightly. Then she put the paper down. "They're reopening an old case," she said. Her assistant frowned. "Is that normal?" Leah shook her head. "Not really, not like this." That evening, Leah sat alone, reading the case file. Her heart sank. She recognized the name. Dwayne Carter, a young black man arrested 15 years ago for armed robbery, convicted without solid proof, sentenced to 20 years. Leah had not been the judge on that case, but she remembered it clearly, because Dwayne wasn't just another name. He had been her classmate in high school. Back then, Dwayne was smart, sharp, kind. He loved books more than basketball. He always talked about going to college, but one day he just disappeared. Later, Leah heard rumors. He was arrested. Wrong place, wrong time. Police planted something. She was in college then. She had no power, no voice. Now, she did. The next morning, Leah walked into the courtroom again, but today's air felt different. This wasn't just about the law. This was personal. This was her community. Her past. Dwayne entered the room, handcuffed, led by guards. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes, those eyes were the same. Sharp, focused. When he saw Leah on the bench, he froze. She gave the smallest nod, no words. But he understood. Someone finally saw him. The new evidence showed serious mistakes in the original trial. No fingerprints, no real witness, missing camera footage, and the biggest surprise. The officer who arrested him was now under investigation for corruption. The courtroom listened in silence. Every detail hit like a hammer. And Dwayne? He just sat there, still as stone. After hours of arguments, Leah closed her folder. Then, in a clear voice, she said, "This court finds the original conviction unsafe. The case is dismissed. Mr. Dwayne Carter is now a free man." Gasps, whispers. Some even clapped. Dwayne stood slowly. He looked around, not believing it. Then he looked at Leah. His lips trembled, and he said softly, "Thank you." Outside the courtroom, reporters tried to get to him. "Do you want to sue the police? What are your next steps?" He looked at them, then pointed back toward the courthouse. "She believed me. That's all I ever wanted." Later that evening, Leah sat in her office again. 2 major cases, both closed, both full of pain, both full of truth. She looked at the photo on her desk again, the little girl with the book, and she whispered, "This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." Because there were more like Dwayne, more like her, and now she had the voice to fight for them all. A few months had passed. The Keller case had faded from headlines. Dwayne Carter was a free man, starting his new life. And Judge Leah Monroe? She was still working, day after day, in the same quiet way. But something had changed. Now, when she walked into the courtroom, people stood a little straighter. They looked at her not with doubt, but with respect. She didn't chase attention. She didn't need cameras. Her work spoke louder than any spotlight ever could. One morning, Leah arrived to find a letter on her desk. It wasn't official. No stamp, no logo, just her name written in neat, careful handwriting. She opened it slowly. It read, "Dear Judge Monroe, my name is Nia. I'm 13. I saw your video on the news with that mean man in the suit. He laughed at you, but you didn't cry. You didn't yell. You stood tall. My mom said you looked like a queen. I want to be like you. I never knew someone like us could wear the black robe. Now I do. Thank you for showing me. Love, Nia." Leah sat back in her chair. For a long moment, she didn't move. No courtroom had ever felt as powerful as that letter. She took a deep breath and smiled. That weekend, Leah visited her old neighborhood. Same cracked sidewalks, same corner store, same tiny library where she had read her first law book, but this time, something was new. Outside the community center, a crowd was waiting. A local group had started something in her name, the Monroe Justice Program, free law classes for teens, workshops for families facing eviction, mentorship for girls like Naya, and they asked Leah to speak at the opening. She stepped up to the microphone. She didn't have a speech. She didn't need one. She looked at the crowd and said, "I was told once that I was just a quiet black girl, that I didn't belong in a courtroom, that people like me were only meant to sit on the bench, not behind the bench. But here I am. And if I can do it, so can you. Because silence is not weakness, kindness is not failure, and truth will always win." The crowd clapped, cheered, and many wiped tears from their eyes. But one little girl stood in the front row holding a notebook. It was Nia. She wore a tiny black jacket that looked just like a judge's robe, and she smiled up at Leah with stars in her eyes. Leah stepped down and gave her a hug, then whispered, "Someday, you'll wear the real one." Later that night, Leah returned home. She made tea, sat by the window, watched the city lights. The world outside still had problems. Injustice still existed. People still judged by what they saw on the outside. But now, there was one less Keller. And one more Leah. And maybe, just maybe, that was how the world would change. Not all at once, but one truth at a time.